Hello and welcome to my review of the Legiones Astartes Leviathan Siege Dreadnought with ranged weapons. This model will cost you £47.50, and I had to go back and look at all of my Leviathan Dreadnought videos just to make sure that I hadn't already reviewed this Dreadnought. I did unbox this about 4 months ago. The Siege Dreadnought with the siege weapons was released a month before this one. I still question whether Games Workshop was a right decision for them to release 2 separate versions of what's kind of the same Leviathan Dreadnought, just with the differences of the arm weapons. This Leviathan Siege Dreadnought comes with 3 weapons. So that means if you wanted to go for a Siege Dreadnought with ranged weapons that had 2, so a specific use ranged weapon equipped Leviathan Dreadnought, you can't. You have to have this kind of strange mishmash. You go for the grav, you go for the melter, or you go for the storm cannon. You can't pick one up that has the dual storm cannons unless you pick up the additional range weapon upgrade spruce, either separately or combined in a pack that only Games Workshop will sell you, as that combined pack. That would cost you £63.50, and we're then past Forge World Leviathan prices. So we'll have a look at this ranged Leviathan Dreadnought up close and in detail. I'll go through the spare parts, specifically the extra weapon, because the other spare parts are locked away by now. I'll even compare these weapon options with the resin counterparts at £15 each. Then I'll go through the size comparisons with other Dreadnoughts. I've got a load of Dreadnoughts here, including some really old ones. And finally, I'll go through all of the rules. Straight away, this particular Dreadnought, I do kind of question its existence anyway, because the ranged weaponry that these Dreadnoughts come with, they aren't the furthest range and they aren't the most powerful. I think what you're getting is you're getting a Dreadnought that is very, very survivable and will cause a nice amount of damage if you can get it within range with its weaponry. But I still think you could cause more damage with a fully kitted out Assault Leviathan Dreadnought, especially if you put it in a Dreadnought drop pod. I think that's where Leviathan Dreadnought shine in close combat, beating up other Dreadnoughts, ripping open tanks and smashing Terminators into pulp. So without further ado then, let's have a look at the detail. I haven't magnetised this Leviathan Dreadnought, but I will say right now it is way easier to magnetise this Leviathan Dreadnought, or both of them really, than the normal Contemptor Dreadnoughts. The normal Contemptor Dreadnoughts, you need a separate kind of shoulder piece. Way easier to magnetise than the actual Contemptor Dreadnoughts themselves. So where you would magnetise this is just here, in this kind of pre-formed hole, I guess, and you'd put a magnet in there, and then you could just magnetise it. You're not going to be able to move it, outwards or inwards, but it's there. I've equipped this one with the storm cannon and the cyclonic melter, I think, but I've just put a bit of white tack on there. These weapons too, you can magnetise, but I've just gone for straight up Volkite. Why not? The Phosphex grenade launcher is a must. It does so much damage and it's fantastic. It's a nice little sting in the tail to anyone that you're going up against. I've gone for kind of like a stand-in stoic pose because I feel a few of mine I've got either running or walking forwards, and I just wanted one just to stand there. I probably will put the other storm cannon on the other side. I like all the options that you get in terms of like the head and the top framing of it, as well as the different chest plates. You can even go for some extra kind of armor framing, I want to call it, on the sides, but I just think it looks a bit strange like that. It works well for the Dark Angels Leviathan, but not just for the normal one. Anyway, that's what the back of the box shows you too. So let me just bring in the Gravflux weapon, which is right here. I will need to pick up another one of these like shoulder mount pieces to put this in, but I think I've got one somewhere. Yeah, I've built the Grav just to give you an idea what it looks like. Probably the most impressive one in resin, which I've given to my Dark Angels Leviathan, and that is magnetized right there. So I will be comparing these weapons in a separate video, but yeah, I think it's very impressive in resin. A lot more depth and detail in there than the plastic, especially around like the lenses and the cabling, and there's more depth around here as well. So yeah, that's the equivalent, and obviously I'm going to magnetize this so I can have one on one side and one on the other if I wish. Here are the resin pieces for the other weapons that are included. So this is the melter, and I think this is one of the best upgrades you can give this dreadnought, is a resin melter cannon, because on the plastic, in certain light you can see the join inside the barrels, whereas this, there's no join whatsoever. It's just one piece and then another piece just, you know, put together. The lens is much better in the middle of that melter as well, and the cabling is definitely better. On the plastic melter, the cabling kind of like merges into one thick piece, whereas this, they retain their individuality all the way through, and the hoops as well that bind them. This one just does not, so this is a big upgrade. The storm cannon, I think they did a good job with the plastic, but again, you just get more sense of depth with the ammunition feeds there, and a lot more detail, as well as the recoil compensators. I don't know what you'd call them. They just look better. There's better tolerances, and there's no mold lines whatsoever to speak of anywhere on there or on the gun, and the lens looks fantastic too. So that's that, but I'll be doing another video comparing the weapons, and I just wanted to show them in this. Size wise then, so I've just compared it to the Dark Angels Leviathan. All intents and purposes they are the same size, and that's also the same as the Siege Dreadnought. I do have another couple of Leviathans somewhere, but this is what I've got today, and yeah, gives you an idea there. You may get a wonky base, you may not. It's really look of the draw. This one wasn't, but the Siege one was, and that's how they kind of all look together. They look pretty cool together actually. Compared to a normal Contemptor Dreadnought then, so you might opt to go for a sort of mortise pattern Contemptor as opposed to the range weapon one, just because, you know, 48-inch range las cannons, you know, and a faster Dreadnought. Yes, the Leviathan can soak up more damage, but your opponent has to deal with this Contemptor Dreadnought, because it's going to start popping tanks and deleting transports and things off the board. This Leviathan, not so much. And this Siege Dreadnought, you've got all the time in the world. If someone just places this on the battlefield, you can pick that off at your leisure, unless it's in a drop pod, and then you need to worry a little bit. So that's it compared to the Dreadnoughts. Let's compare it to some tanks. So I've got a Predator, so it's much bigger than a Predator. I have a Land Raider Proteus. It's even taller than a Land Raider Proteus. Then we've got the Land Raider Spartan. Yeah, it's still a bit taller than a Land Raider Spartan, but just the sheer volume now, the Spartan is showing its size. And then maybe you wanted to compare it to like a small Rhino, which would be similar to the Predator. And finally a Kratos. I haven't got the Telemon Dreadnought nearby, but I can tell you right now that the Telemon is bigger than the Leviathan, and also So is the Primaris Redemptor Dreadnought. You know, there was a time where these Leviathans were the biggest, tallest dreadnoughts, but that was overtaken by the Telemon, and then it was also overtaken by the Redemptor. Metal Space Marine Dreadnought right there. So this is where we've come in all these years. Probably just higher than half the height, just past the torso of the Leviathan. That's where it stands up next to one of those. So infantry wise, let's compare it to a Cataphractii Terminator and a few marks of Space Marines. So if you're going with your, you know, box set that you got with so if you're going with your Army of Darkness box set, that's where your Mark 6 measures up. So this Leviathan will, yeah, dwarf your Mark 6s, your Mark 3s, your Mark 4s, and even your Terminators as well. You know, if you've got the Spartan, this is going to be another big model to add to your collection if you're just starting out. Final little comparison I'd like to make is with some 40k miniatures, because you can use these Leviathan Dreadnoughts in Warhammer 40,000. Yeah, compared to a Space Marine is, yeah, smaller than one of the legs of the Leviathan. A Primaris is maybe up to the crotch, again smaller than one of the legs, and Sly Marbo could probably run underneath his undercarriage if he wanted to. Okay, so this is my part of the review where I will go through all of the rules for the Leviathan Siege Dreadnought with ranged weapons. Unlike the Contemptor Dreadnought, which is an elite choice, the Leviathans are heavy support choices, so that does impact your choices when it comes to picking a heavy support squad, any Land Raiders, Sicarans, Kratos, even the gunships and things. It's the hotly contested unit type for Space Marines. It even goes up against the Deredio Dreadnought, which is a fair amount cheaper. So, first things first, the points cost of the Leviathan Dreadnought is 270 points. Its stat line is as follows: movement of 6 inches, weapon skill is 5, ballistic skill 5, strength and toughness are both 8, 7 wounds, initiative 4, 5 attacks, leadership 9, and a save of 2+. How does that compare to a Deredio? Well, Deredio is much cheaper at 205 points. The Deredio is faster, not as strong at 7, not as tough at 7, has 1 less wound, has way fewer attacks, but has the same save. Compared to the Contemptor, Contemptor is a fair bit faster. It's 8-inch movement, same weapon skill and ballistic skill, only 1 less strength and toughness, only 1 fewer wounds at 6, same initiative, 2 fewer attacks though, but the same leadership and the same save. You know, it's important to note that Deredio, Leviathan and Contemptors, they all have their 2+ normal save and their 5+ invulnerable. So the unit composition is 1 Legion Leviathan Dreadnought. War gear is 2 Leviathan Siege Claws with built-in melter gun, 2 heavy flamers, atomantic deflector, special rules Legiones Astartes, Dreadnought Talon, Hammer of Wrath, 3 move through cover. Dedicated transport. A Legion Leviathan Dreadnought Talon of no more than 1 model may select a Legion Dreadnought drop pod or Legion Charybdis Assault Claw as a dedicated transport. As a dedicated transport, this does not use up an additional force organisation slot, but its points cost must still be paid for as part of the army. So that's nice. You know, no more than 1 model, you can get a single drop pod for it, or the Charybdis. Technically, you can put it in a Mastodon as well. I think you can put it in a Mastodon or a Stormbird, still a Dreadnought, but of course they're then a Lord of War choice. Options. The unit may include up to 2 Leviathan Dreadnoughts at 270 points per model, so you're not getting any discount for doing that. It works the same as the Contemptor Dreadnought Talon, but the Deredio, you can only have them in a pair. Any Legion Leviathan Dreadnought in that unit may replace either of its Leviathan Siege Claws and inbuilt melter gun with one of the following: a Leviathan Siege Drill and inbuilt melter gun at 5 points, Leviathan Storm Cannon at 10 points, Cyclonic Melter Lance at 20 points, or a Grav Flux Bombard at 5 points. So yeah, that does mean you can pay 10 points for 2 Grav Flux Bombards, which is very nice. If any Leviathan Siege Claw is replaced with a Leviathan Storm Cannon, Cyclonic Melter Lance or Grav Flux Bombard, then the model reduces its attacks characteristic to 4. This is only applied once, regardless of how many weapons are replaced. So you only, the only downside is you go down to 4 attacks instead of like 3. Any Legion Leviathan Dreadnought may take 1 Phosphex Discharger, worth doing, and at 20 points, and 2, and may exchange both of its heavy flamers for 2 twin-linked Volkite calibers at 15 points. So, to go for the ultimate pricey Leviathan Siege Dreadnought, you'd go for 2 Cyclonic Melter Lances, so that's an extra 40 points, so that's 310. You go for the Phosphex Discharger, which is 20, that's 330 points. Then you go for the Volkite, which would be 345 points for a single Leviathan Siege Dreadnought. But what do these weapons actually do? Because the Contemptor is a happy mix, happy balance of ranged and close combat. You can give it a claw, you can give it a twin-link las cannon. The Doredio is the ultimate long-range dreadnought, and this Leviathan is kind of somewhere in between. It's murderous in close combat with the claws and the drills, with those 5 attacks and putting it in a drop pod. But the ranged version, let me go through some of the weapons. So the 3 weapons that it's offering is the Leviathan Storm Cannon, and you'll find that in the auto weapons section, and that is a 24-inch range, strength 7, AP 4, heavy 6, rending 5+, sunder. Okay, so rending 5+ is nice. It's nice that it's got 6 shots, but it's only AP 4, and I know rending kind of negates that. But it's 24-inch range, and if it can only move 6 inches, its effective range is only going to be 30 inches. So I would have preferred it to be 36-inch range, and I'm quite sure that in the older rules it was 36-inch range. It's almost like having, multiple Reaper autocannons, and I think it should be 36-inch range. So that weapon is quite specific against softer units. Space Marines may be able to survive against the onslaught of that. The other 2 weapons, the Grav Flux Bombard, because we're saving the best till last. The Grav Flux Bombard is even shorter range. It's an 18-inch range, AP 4, it's heavy 1, large blast 5-inch, graviton collapse, torsion crusher, ignores cover, and concussive. Yeah, there's some fancy words in there, such as torsion crusher, which just means when a target with an armor value is struck by the weapon with this rule, the amount of hull point damage caused by the weapon is doubled. That's quite nice. So the Grav Flux Bombard, good against vehicles in that regard. It ignores cover, which is also quite nice. Graviton Collapse. Instead of rolling to wound normally with a weapon with this rule, the controlling player of any model hit by it must roll equal to or under that model's strength characteristic of 2d6, or it suffers a wound. Against targets with an armor value, the attacking player rolls 4d6 for armor penetration instead. Again, 4d6 is pretty good. Maximum output there could be 24 for armor penetration. But I would have preferred it to have Graviton Pulse and Haywire. I can't see why it doesn't have Haywire. It's a bit of an omission, I think. So again, that weapon is very, very specific to certain targets. But the best weapon, I think, for the Leviathan Siege Dreadnought is the Cyclonic Melter Lance. Again, it's a very short range. It's 18-inch, so the effective range is only 24 inches with one of these. It's a strength 8, but it is AP 1 and 4 shots and heavy 4 and armor bane. So what you're getting with that is the same number of shots as the Melter Blast Gun, more shots than the Magnum Melter Cannon at a lower range. So typically one Cyclonic Melter Lance will be enough, but if you want to pay the extra points and go for 2, you're going to be rocking 8 Strength 8 AP1 Armor Bane shots. This thing is going to delete tanks, delete dreadnoughts, melt Terminators. The only downside of this, and all of the other weapons for that matter, is just the range. They call it a ranged weapon dreadnought, but in reality there's nothing really ranged about them. And maybe there are some sweet combinations that you could go for, such as the Claw and the Gravflux, or even the Melter and the Siege Drill. But over any of the ranged variants, I'd always go for a full Siege Dreadnought with the close combat weapons, send it down in a drop pod and rip up other dreadnoughts and tanks and high priority targets, and then go for the weaker stuff. Sending one of these in a drop pod with the ranged weaponry, there's not a huge guarantee that you're gonna get the right amount of damage output to claw back its cost. Whereas the Siege Dreadnought with melee weapons, I feel like there's a higher chance of that happening. Because if you don't put one of these ranged weapon equipped Leviathan Dreadnoughts in a drop pod, then it's going to be moving along the board at 6 inches only to get in range with its 18-inch weapons, and it's going to be a big target, or probably even worse, it's going to be ignored, and you're going to sink, you know, almost 300 points into a weapons platform where your opponent is going to be targeting, you know, the Land Raider Spartan or your heavy weapons team or something like that. If I saw one of these on the board with the ranged weapons, I would completely ignore it all game. Whereas if I knew someone had a Siege Dreadnought with melee weapons in a drop pod, I would be planning strategies on how to counter that from the very start. So that just gives you an idea of if it's needed, how useful it is. I think it's like one of the least useful dreadnoughts out of the three. You know, if we look at like the ultimate options, so if we go for a Contemptor Dreadnought with twin link las cannons, I think that's much more useful than this Siege Dreadnought. Likewise, I think a Siege Dreadnought with melee weapons, as I've just explained, is much more useful, especially if you pick up a drop pod. And likewise, I think a Doredio Dreadnought is much more useful, especially if you arm it with an Arachnus Heavy las cannon battery at the 48-inch range with that strength 10. Even the Hellfire Plasma Cannonade at 36-inch range has a potential of causing your opponent much more damage if they don't destroy it with las cannons first. So out of the 4 possible variants, this is, I think, the least useful, but it still looks pretty cool. What do you guys think of the Leviathan Siege Dreadnought with ranged weapons? Please do put your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. It'd be great to hear from you. Thank you ever so much for joining me today. Thank you for watching. The Emperor Protects.